yourself.
Well, now, thank you for having me, and this is going to be something quite different than the last presentation because I don't have that kind of numbers, and those are pretty darn impressive, and I'm not going to give you all that kind of wonderful knowledge of agriculture as we were given, because I actually can talk for hours and hours like that about traditional Chinese medicine. Because I'm actually a doctor of Oriental medicine. I'm not trained as you are. But I have been on the land for a long while, first in master forest stewardship context and so on. And then my husband and I got a chance to buy an additional 60 acres that had been Hereford cattle and timber. And so what happened is, that it had been from 1949 on until 2010 when we were able to get it. And it was depleted, and the weeds had come up, or the dynamic accumulators had come up, and so it was in dire shape because Mr. Bennett was 92 when he died, and he was like many of us. He didn't have somebody that was going to step in and be his succession plan. So his kids were already old. They didn't want it, and so it got on the market. And I said, I can't let that farm get developed. I just can't. So that's my starting point. So then I got sheep because I'm all about organic farming, or organic gardening, and I'm very woo-woo because, my goodness, it's an agrarian society that came up with Chinese medicine. So all the things that I think about are very much about nurturing health as opposed to fixing like mechanic. They always say that acupuncturist, Oriental medicine, we are gardeners. The name is Yishan, which is to nourish abundance, to nourish health. And so consequently, my approach is entirely different. I don't know anything about synthetic fertilizers. I had no clue about anything like that. I wouldn't know a total no-till driller if it ran into me. But I know how the world works, the earth works, and I know how plants work. And so I thought, okay, here's this land that needs to be restored. And oh my goodness, who's the best restorers? Ruminants. Okay, well, cattle are a little big for me, but sheep, we could do sheep. Goats are too smart for me, way too smart. So that's why it became Bah Bah Blacktail Farm, because I am up on 100 acres on the southwest side of Little Blacktail Mountain, and 3,300 feet. It's still plenty of snow and ice over there now. Don't see anything that looks like it could be edible. So that's the introduction. So what I want to do is, it gives you a little preface of what I'd like to talk about. And if there's something that is really way beneath you, because I'm used to talking to Forage kids and beginning homesteaders that just came from the city, and I say, this is the front end of the sheep. So I don't want to be too condescending at all. So if some of this stuff is not of interest to you, just like this, move on, go to the next thing. Okay, so first I want to talk about what my goals were, and then I want to talk about a couple definitions that are significant, and what do we actually manage? What does it mean to manage this? And then what's helpful for you if you want to do that? What's helpful for your success? And so the questions that I encounter quite a lot are, how much forage does my land grow? Is it worth it for me to try to grow forage for my animals? And another one, how many animals can I graze? That's the big question. How many animals can I have on my land? How big do I make the paddocks? How often do I have to move them? These are the questions that I'm asked all the time. Are any of these significant to you? Yes, or move on. Okay, all right, so good. So, and then also, how do I begin? Now, those guys can tell you the theory about why this all works, but I can tell you, all right, you got this problem, this is how you start, this is the next step, this is the next step, this will work. So it's very hands-on. And then we're going to look back and see what we did about our reaching the goals with silvopasture. So there are 3 things that I want to tell you about. Judge the canopy method and estimate the forage on the land and determine a sequence for your grazing plan. So those are kind of some things we're going to look at. So agroforestry in the Pacific Northwest. I was going to call this saw logs and soil health. Because it's all about trees where I am. We have 31 inches of precipitation a year, and we got lots of trees. We got, you know, if you don't do anything, you get about 2,000 stems per acre comes up without any difficulty. The trees are like our weeds, right? And that's a really great thing. So, what are my personal goals when I got this? First of all, do no harm to the land. You know, do no harm. Don't wreck it. Don't waste the resources. You know, parents told me don't waste, you know, and that stuff. So we don't want to waste resources. Secure a supply of food. I happen to think that that's a really cool thing to do, to eat. Create, and if you think about it, the top 6 inches of our earth is what feeds all of us, all the animals, all the plants, all the everything. You know, it's like, if you don't have that 6 inches of soil, you are in trouble. Third topic is I want to create wealth. Well, you know, I'm kind of fortunate because I poked all those needles and I did all that stuff all those years, so I'm okay. But I want to create real wealth, which is an abundance of resources that are in perpetuity. That's real wealth. That's real wealth. So agroforestry, they say, is a set of practices within land use geared to optimize productivity and at the same time conservation. So therein lies the, you know, little challenge. Okay, so we have alley cropping and windbreaks and riparian buffers and forest farms and all kinds of things that we used to just call making do. And those are now agroforestry. But there's now silvopasture. So what is silvopasture as opposed to agroforestry? So silvopasture is growing perennial grasses or grass-legume mix in a forest stand for the purpose of livestock forage. So you've got 3 things that you've got to worry about. You've got the trees, you've got the forage, and you've got the livestock. So what do we actually manage about those things? If you're thinking about the trees, I mean, if you're doing silvopasture, what do you actually manage? You manage just the understory, the amount of sunlight that comes through the canopy. All right, and for those of you that grow small things, short things, you know, you maybe not really relate to canopy in the same way, but the canopy is the overstory that is going to affect what grows underneath. So if we have a canopy that is 50%, what would that mean? That would mean I take a tape and I make 42 feet diameter, and then I look and I see, is that shaded, is that shaded, is that shaded? Is everything shaded under there, or how much of it is shaded? That tells me how much the canopy. You got to do this, you know, it's overhead. You can't do it long shadows of the moon, of the sun. But so it's the amount of canopy has to be no. If it's 50%, it means half of the sky is open for you. So that concept, we need to have a canopy cover of no more than 35%. Because otherwise, the sun is not going to get in there. It's not going to grow the grass. You know, this is pretty obvious. We also want to manage the wood growth. If you've ever grown a little patch of carrots, if you have 100 carrots in that section, they're all going to be really tiny. If you have 100 carrots and you pull out a few and you eat them and you just go on from there, then the ones that remain are going to put on the same amount of growth and they're going to be much more interesting carrots. And maybe you're going to take a farmer's market, somebody's going to want to buy those carrots because they're going to be big and beautiful. So you want to maximize your best trees. So it really is a matter of managing the canopy so that gets the sunlight in, or managing the growth of the trees to maximize the good ones. All right, so in the domain of forages, what can we really manage about the forage if we do silvopasture? Well, our choice of species and how much residual do you leave? Because essentially those are solar collectors. You know, these are all little solar collectors, blades of grass. And so they have to get the canopy, you know, they have to get an open canopy, and they need to have moisture in soil, moisture and sun. And so you have to have enough residual left for the regrowth. It's always a good idea to choose, when you're choosing your seeds, when you're choosing your grass, to match the kind of grass with the kind of rainfall. And what's your profile there? Like, does most of your rainfall fall in the summer, or is it more in the winter? I mean, in Kerrywood, Idaho, where I'm at, it is 31 inches a year of precipitation. It always seems like more when I'm shoveling the snow, but 31 inches. And what happens is that 3/4 of it comes in by April, and then the rest of it comes in November and December. So I have a drought plan date that if I don't have 75% by April 15th, then I start to worry. What do I have to do? Because there's going to be a drought, even though it looks mud season. But there's going to be a drought because the amount is not going to be sufficient to get the cool season grasses to grow during the right time when I need them to be growing. So choosing your species and leaving the residual and matching the species with the needs of with the availability of your moisture is important. And also the nutritional need of your animals, because that's the third part. Okay, so every animal is not equally a good grazer, and every species of that animal, you know, some people really like goats, and goats are really great animals, and they love to browse. So if you have fruit trees, it's maybe not the best, but you know, and if you want to fence them, I want to see the goats deal with the virtual fences. You know, they'll probably figure something out. They'll be there behind. They'll be behind, going, "I can get mine to do this. Let's touch it, short circuit it, and then we'll go." We'll get out of here. So you got to figure out what your grazing characteristics. Are you trying to get rid of brush? Well, you don't put a bunch of sheep in there. You put the goats in there. Put those collars on them, though. And so you want to match things with what they need. It's always nice to have mixtures of animals and stuff, but I like to apply the tools as well as I can. So the ease of handling and so forth is very important. And also the what you manage about them is how they harvest. Okay, in my diagram at home, I always have a picture for the kids, and I say, you know, this is the blade of grass, and you want them to take this part in the middle. You don't want them to eat the bottom. You don't want them to take the top. They need to eat this. So how are we going to do that? We have to either train the sheep, make them really, really smart. That might be possible, but I haven't done it yet. Or you have to move them. So you're the control of the harvest. So it's all about gates, isn't it? Gates and gates. So the next thing is, what is helpful for when you want to manage these three things? Well, for managing trees, what's helpful is you have to understand the regeneration pattern, like the succession plan that they have. And if any of you have forests, you understand that when you look at a forest, you can say it's a young, it's regrowing, it's this, it's that. So understanding regeneration is important. Understanding the species and how that affects the density, because trees, like every other plant, they are looking for the sun, and so they are consequently trying to reach their way up there and crowd out the other guys. And so we don't say that they are shade loving. We say they're shade tolerant if they are. So you have to think about your canopy in terms of the trees that you choose to leave also. There's something called the Forest Practices Act, and I urge you to be, if you do have forestry, if you do have forests, to become familiar with the Forest Practices Act and what it entails, because it helps us to protect the streams for their quality from the erosion and so forth. It talks about roadways, it talks about a lot of things that you think are pretty boring, except that they really actually make a difference in our environment. So, please. It's also a good idea to appreciate the value, the monetary value of what's on your land. You may look at it and it looks like just a thicket of trees, it's all just dog fur. Well, I can take an acre of that and it maybe makes me $500 or $5,000 worth of wood to clear it out and to thin out so that my big trees, my crop trees, can continue to grow. And so I'm going to have crop trees that are, you know, they're my saw logs in my case, because they're, you know, it's a conifer forest. They could be the, you know, the honey locust or the whatever. You know, that's your crop tree that you're going to keep. So you make your marking about them, and then clear around it. And so by clearing around it, you're doing something good for those trees, and you're also making $5 grand. You know, which is okay, because you can turn that back into doing something, pay for the trucker or whatever. So, anyway, so in terms of forage, you should understand the grasses and the variations between the grasses. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir on that one. My gosh, you know, here I'm going to tell you that consider orchard grass and make sure you know which one. Get Paiute because it's more drought resistant, and you know, I mean, you guys are way beyond that, I think. But profile of their growth is important. When do they come on and when do they drop off? Because all food is not equal in the eyes of your sheep or goat or cow. You know, they say, oh, it's really tasty, it's in its vegetative state. Or, oh, it's kind of like stale bread. You know, so, we don't use drills and things like that, we just broadcast. You need to broadcast. Make sure that the seed is in contact with the soil to germinate, inoculate the legumes and so forth. And then here's something to think about. A mile of road, 14 feet wide, like in our case a logging road, a mile of road, 14 feet wide is 1.7 acres. And you know, if you're growing forage, you might as well be eating from that farm. It's just sitting there. And so maybe it's going to be subpar. You know, it won't grow like a beautiful field, but you are seeding it, you're preserving the soil, you're building it, and you're grazing it at a low level. And the trick is, you have to be the manager to harvest the harvester off. Get the machine off of it before it eats it all down. So, livestock planting. What do you do to have sheep out in the woods? You have to have water within 600 feet. It's best if your containment area lets them drink from the water and eat their food and see the other one. Because if they don't see the other one, then they're going to walk there, they're going to say, what's she doing over there? And so you need to do that. Think about how much water they need. And of course, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. I don't tell you how much water your animals need. But when I tell the young people that are starting out, I say, you know, it's like a gallon of water per 100 pounds of animal every day. So you have to make some provision for your animals to have water and make sure that it is close by to where they're going to graze. Contain, you know, salt, minerals, and so forth. I'm a big believer in zinc and all of these, you know, to have the right salts for them. Again, you guys already have that experience. Containment fencing. There is a difference between perimeter fencing for animals and containment. They're just moving them along, traffic fencing I call it. And so there are all kinds of wonderful things. In general, I tell people, think of it as 1 joule per mile and a 3-foot rod for every joule. And I don't know if you probably, some people probably have more knowledge than I do about that electrical setup. How about your grazing plan? Well, this is where I can really talk with you with some degree of experience, because making a grazing plan is kind of it's a bigger deal than people think in the beginning. Because if you really want to roam people through, run your animals through, you'd better have a good grazing plan. So that's where the little board comes in. So imagine that we have a farm, and it's got some sections, all different sections, and we've got a stream that goes through somewhere, like that. And so what are we going to do about this grazing plan? How will we get this sorted out? Well, the first thing I'm going to notice is grass likes sunshine and water. And so most likely, if I go and peruse my land, I'm going to find that this area is the best regrowth because it's all along that water course. So I might make my first one here, my second one here, etc. And so the pattern is going to be different than just a checkerboard. So start where the regrowth is the fastest. Because if you think about it, you've got to put them on there, they harvest it down, get them off, go to the next thing, and don't let them eat too much. And then you've got to go with where it regrows the fastest in order to get them back on the land again. So I like to be able to get 4 passes through all of my pastures. So what happens if I get over here, I'm at in my case, in good years it's 21 days to regrow, to come back. But maybe I'm at 15 over here. Well, then what do? That's when I come out here and I do this little silvopasture. I'm going to do 16. I'm going to do quicker because I don't have as much forage on there. And then I come over here and do 17, and then zip down here and do 18. And then by that time, things are starting to get regrown here. So I use the pastures not equally as the ones that are like my regular regrowing pasture. In my case, I have 60 acres that I use for the sheep. About 20 of that is really good, pure, good pasture. About 20 of that is marginal in between silvopasture. And then about 20% of it, or 20 acres of it, is deeper forest, or it's right near the creek or something like that. So I use those 20 acres, and then when I need to, I have the pressure relief valve, and so maybe I'll do 4 times on those ones that are the prime pastures. I'll go 4 passes through, but every second pass I have to go over here because I have to let it catch up. Okay, so that's one of the ways that is most useful to use silvopasture, rather than saying, oh, I'll throw the animals out there. Because if you just throw the animals out there, it's not going to work. You're going to destroy your resource. So the next big question is always, how big are the paddocks? So, go.
What's a good field measurement? Let's say you're just walking out of one of your paddocks and you're looking out. What's a good metric to look at to say, okay, this field's ready, or this is not quite ready?
Oh, that's such a good question. So there is a book called Capturing Sunlight. Do you know it? It's by Woody Lane, PhD. He's a nutritionist, animal nutritionist from Cornell University. And that book is probably the single most useful book for the kinds of things that we're doing here. And Capturing Sunlight. And on page 289, I think, 289 or so. I do tell the kids this a lot. That's where it has the math and how to figure out how much forage. Okay, so how do we want to figure out the forage in here? I'm gonna take a frame, and the frame's gonna be specifically 12 inches by 11.5 inches. I'll throw that frame down here, cut all the stuff, put it in a paper bag, dry it. Do the same thing over here, same thing over there, lots of different samples, maybe 10 samples. And then all these little paper bags, I'm gonna let them dry out, and I'm going to weigh how much is in there. In grams, it has to be in grams. And then you do the math on page 289, which is so simple. And the reason it has to be an 11.5 by 12 is because the math comes out even. It's really great. So you do the math and you come up with how many pounds per acre that your field makes. So let's have an example of, so if, say it came out to be, we did the math, it came out to be 2,000 pounds per acre. Now, the silver pasture area that I'm doing, I'm figuring that some of them are 400, some of them are 600 or 800. Ideally, I'd like them to be 1,100, but I don't look for more than that. And so that's probably small numbers compared to what you're used to on proper fields. But so if I have 2,000 pounds comes up acre, that's what grows. Okay, then I have to take off 25% is going to be trampled. It's worthless. It's going to be pooped on, etc. Then we're going to have 25% that they can eat, and then I need to leave 50% for the solar collectors to collect to regrow. So I'm not growing 2,000 pounds per acre. I'm only growing a quarter of that. Okay, so then we look at those, at the quarter of that, well if I have 2 acres, which is sort of, I tell the people, start with 2 acres, it's manageable, make 2 acres kind of where you can go in and out easily and start your silver pasture there. So if you did 2 acres, and so then you got maybe 1,000 pounds of forage that you got off of that little 2-acre silver pasture patch, you could feed 1 AUM. So I could feed, a cow or 6 sheep or from just that. So you think about it in terms of meals, it's kind of like if you have a bunch of children and you think you think, well, it would be really nice if we could all go over and eat it at this place where they have a free feed going on, because that's 1 less meal that I got to get out of my pantry. Well, it's the same thing with your sheep or your cows or your goats. You say, well, that silver pasture, it's not, in amongst the trees, it's not that good, shelters them and so forth, but I can get a couple of AUMs there, and that maybe makes a difference. Kind of reduces your costs. So somebody might ask, did that answer your question at all, the idea, and where to find the information? Okay. So the other question I get asked, how big are the paddocks? How big should they be? And of course I give it away, that about 2 acres does about 1 cow, But if you didn't know that piece, if you looked at how many days do you want to move them? Like if your work permit or your work schedule is such that you're not permitted to go out there but once every 3 days. All right, so then 3 days is the time they're going to harvest. I personally don't leave any animal on any grass for more than 2 days before it's moved, because it's just so much better. If I can do it every day, I do, but if I have to, I'll leave them the second day. So if you want to move them every 3 days, and then you think about the amount of feed, well, how many animals do you have? So if they need 3% to 5% of their body weight, then you know how much you've got to feed them. So you do all the math for that. How much do they weigh? How much is 3% of that or 5% of that? I will say 5 because I trample it. And so that's what I need, and this is what I've grown. A quarter of what I've grown is available. And then you compare them, and then you see, the pocket's gonna feel it, because there's not enough. But if you're smart and you use your good fields and take them off of there quickly, and then put them in the more marginal producing field like a silvopasture, and that kind of buys you time till your other grass will grow up. So that's kind of the leapfrog that you do. How big are the paddocks? Well, again, the math is on page 289. I can tell you that's the math. So how to do silvopasture? First of all, start with a careful assessment of your forest. What are your crop trees? What are your save keeper trees? What are you wanting to preserve? And think about it this way, that it's basically, when I look at the land, I say that's a harvest plan. It's a harvestable resource. So I have the firewood trees, and I have the brush that they'll probably just nibble down, and I have a few saw logs that I'm gonna send to mill, and then I have these two that are 150 years old that are gonna stay there, and their job is to stay there for the end of time and be, the overstory, and have the mycelium going out and supporting the others. And so that's their harvest. Their harvest is perpetuity. Some are saw logs and so on. So have an idea in your mind, the timeline that you want for each of the entities that are living there. So mapping the stand to identify the keepers, create a plan, and then in that you're going to see some areas are more suitable for harvest and some are not. There are areas in this part here where it's just way too steep. This is a little cliff. Okay, so you're not going to be easily harvesting that. So that might be a good area where the cliff comes out. They can come in there and graze around there. So that would be good. But then there's another area that's like maybe over here, and it's inaccessible to everything. So it's going to be on the other side of number 18, 17. So it's going to be just too difficult to do that as silvopasture. So just leave it. Let the deer live there or something. So plan your flow of things such that you find suitable areas. When you look at it, consider what needs to be done with that land. Like, is it worth it to you? If I open the canopy, I'll make some money, I'll sell some firewood, or sell some pulpwood or whatever, and also I'll get more forage, so that's worth it. But how much does it cost? It costs me $1,200 to have these guys do this. So you have a basis of looking at it by saying, what is it really worth to you? What will you really gain? What needs done? And then one thing to bear in mind is that when you seed it, you can't just seed it and they're going to graze it that year. I haven't found that to be possible, because as soon as they pull on it, the roots will come out. So whatever you're going to seed, you're going to plan for the long run. Let it get its seeds, let it get its roots in, and really develop the pasture a little bit. And that's an error that I see people make, is they say, I seeded it, and then it was this tall, and then I put them on there, and well, what a surprise. So that's something to think about, when you make your plan. Map out the areas of the fastest regrowth. Think about where things grow. So when they say, what do you do up there in Idaho? I watch the grass grow. That's what I do. And then I watch the trees grow. So I watch the grass grow, and I see how fast does it come in again. Because that's the place that you start, is where the grass regrows the fastest, because that's the regrowth interval determines everything. And when you're laying out your grazing units, one of the things that I think is really important is to have a calendar and take a photo of that place on that day. And then the same thing the next year, and the same thing the next year. And have your key locations. You know, I might have it here, I might have one here, I might one here. You know, take photos, and this is that year's photo. When I do my weighing of sheep, I always weigh them on the solstice. Every year, they know this is the time. It's like you have a rhythm to things, and if you can look then, I didn't even have to look to tell you in April that it was going to be a drought year, because I could look and I know that the picture of that pond should look like this at that time. And I said, uh-oh, uh-oh. And then I looked at the numbers. Because if you do things on a regular basis, you'll get a real sixth sense very quickly. So take photos. The Drought Plan activation date is 70% of the spring. Talk about that. Laying out the grazing units. Put your gates. This is kind of basic stuff for you guys, but put your gates so that they're on high ground, so that they don't get mushy. Don't put them to where the animal has to go around. And, you know how to put gates. You know, kind of make your arrangements. But that, okay, so let's look at this. Did we meet goals? Did we do no harm? You know, preserving the soil. I think so. I think Pasture makes it for that. How about securing the food supply? Well, increasing the water holding and the organic material is everything. Making a healthy living soil. I mean, the juju that happens between photosynthesis and exudate into the root is well documented, and so it's important to make use of that. The diversity of roots, I would encourage you to read the book by Robert, what's his name? Novick? Couric. And it's called Roots Demystified. And it's a really nice graphic about all the different kinds of root systems and how they, this one's tall, this one's short, and so forth. That's a really cool idea. So when you're creating wealth, you're creating the wealth of the trees that are adding to the saw logs. Think of the carrots. Instead of 100 carrots, you're going to have a dozen really good ones. So you're adding the wealth there. You're adding the wealth into the soil. You're adding the wealth into the lamb's legs that are going to be delicious for dinner. You're creating wealth in the real true sense of the word. Use your marginal land and in-between lands productively, and do the layering, because I've got one thing happening at a 15-year interval that I'm going to harvest in 15 years. I have another at 2 year, another to this year, and so forth. So you can alter your time so you have overlapping streams of income. This is probably not news to you. And go forth and enjoy a healthy, beautiful landscape with wildlife possibilities and good aesthetics.
Are you using fixed paddocks?
No, I have, those are all electronet fencing. I think you can see it here.
Right.
And what I do is I have,
If you're moving them
the perimeter is woven wire, the big perimeter.
back. Right.
And so that gives a place where my livestock guardian dogs say, if you come in here, I bite your ass.
Yes.
So that gives them a definite idea. And then the electronic fence is everything in between. And I've done some with just a tape, but there's a training time. So, yeah.
Do you sell meat?
I sell meat, but mostly I sell the products that people can use to create their own farms. My number one customers are people who want to start a flock. I have, in the spring, I have probably 10% or 15% of the babies go to people that want to grow them on their own grass and put them in their freezer. So they go out and they'll buy 5 from me or 10 from me or whatever. And so those they go on their grass and they get eaten. And then I have a percentage that want to buy a freezer animal in the fall. So I put it on my grass and then they, either I shoot it or they do the work. And, but that's a
You
very,
have to buy the whole animal, just to
That's
get
a
to lay the lamb?
yeah. Yes, the reason being, you know, it's a really valid question. The reason being is that the law says that I can sell you an animal, but I can't sell you meat unless it's a USDA
Oh,
approved
okay.
facility. So that adds another $175 to an animal that maybe costs $300. People don't want to do that. I do teach, you know, how to humanely harvest your sheep. That's a very important thing to me. When, for many, many years, when I was younger, I was a vegetarian and very careful about not killing other things. You can imagine I was, you know, when I went to Asia, I had been vegetarian for a long while. And then I realized really soon that that was a very proud and spoiled stance for me to take at that time. Because people were honoring me and saying, "Doctor, I brought you this goose," you know, and I was going, "I don't eat it." And so then I just got over it and said, you know, that's just stupid. And the real reason that I didn't, that I happened to be vegetarian at those times was because more of the spiritual or the humane ethics kind of thing. Not because I didn't like meat, but because I didn't want to promote
Killing
factory
animals.
farms. I didn't want, you know, chickens out of the battery and that kind of thing. But if you grow them your own self, and you know, if they live
And I
well,
wouldn't want to.
pardon me?
I wouldn't want to, I want to kill yours.
Yeah. And so I think it's important, and I think it's a really important part, because I tell my animals, your life will be absolutely perfect in every way, all your life, until that one bad moment. And, you know, if we could make that agreement to each other, wouldn't that be nice? If we knew that we were gonna be all in to do anything, 2 o'clock in the morning, doesn't matter, I'm gonna be taking care of you, help you, you know, it's a pretty good deal. So, yeah, but I'm gonna do it humanely. A while back I had a lot of people who wanted to know if they could come and do halal butchery on my place. And I said, well, let me study it. And of course, I mean, I have 2 doctorate degrees. If there's anything I do, it's study. And so I studied like crazy and said, well, you know, I don't know exactly the moment of death and which kind of knife. And so I said, okay, yeah, you can do it, but let me see your knife. Let me see, no, I can do it much. And so I had like the vice president of Saudi Bank came and he did this there and stuff like that. And I learned a lot from those guys. So it's all about being humane, being fair to the animals. So, but the meat has to be sold as an animal, or half an animal, you and somebody else who have small households. And from an average little Katahdin sheep, you're really only going to get about 45 pounds, 50 pounds. So it's not that huge. Any other questions?
What was the name of that last book you were talking about? Was it Roots or?
It's called Roots Demystified. Demystified. It's by Robert Kourick, or Kourick. And it's got beautiful pictures of root systems, and really he talks about a lot of the things that specialists would know how to address. Robert Kourick. Kourick. What other questions? Yes.
If you don't mind, when you made that transition from vegetarian to non,
Yeah,
what did you experience?
I had a lot more energy. When I was young, I had a lot of energy. A lot of energy. When I was in Asia, I would see over 100 patients a day, 6 days a week. I rode everywhere on a bicycle. I was trim and fit, but it was a pretty rigorous life. I was a doctor for a World Health Organization. And so, I was diminishing in my vitality, and when I started eating meat, I did notice that there was a huge difference. It's like the lights were coming on a little bit. But it was a gradual transition, you know, because it was only when I really could guarantee that the animals had been humanely harvested that I felt better about it. Because that was the whole reason. Yeah. Questions? Yes.
Is that what you use as those, what they call Anatolian sheepdogs for your guard dogs?
I have 3 guardian dogs. One of them is a pure Marima, and she stays right close to the sheep themselves. And the Marima Pyrenees cross is the male, and he's very, very good. But the one that's a pure Pyrenees, she prefers to bark and travel. And this is consistent with, I think, my generalization of what their breed came from. Because if you think about the Pyrenees and the plain in Spain, it's very vast, and so they want to go out to the perimeter and patrol out there. And so, whereas the Marimas came from Italy, and the terrain is different, it's very tight, it's very close, they stay with the sheep more closely. They all stay with the sheep, but for instance, when I had a cougar attack recently, this was 2 years ago, I came to the farm and I saw one of the ewes had her face torn off. And so I saw that she wasn't gonna make it. I checked her baby was okay. And so I got the rifle and shot her and was dressing her out. And when the dog came and said, you know, like Rin Tin Tin, do you remember Rin Tin Tin? They probably have new ones now. And he's like, come on, quick, it's over here. I grabbed the gun and went down there, and the female, Marima, had put herself in the middle of the field and said, come here. And the sheep will all come to her and lay down. And then the male, who is the Marima and Pyrenees, he was the one who came and got me and said, it's in that woods, let's go get it. And the other one was like, bark, 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 and bark. You know? So there are different temperaments, and it works well, in my opinion, to have a couple of different, slightly off to each other's breeds, because what you don't think of, I will, and vice versa.
How about the wolves? Do you have those up there?
We have had wolves around. I have not had a problem. I have more problems with cougars. Cougars are fairly significant in our area. Bears used to be, but we've got so many people now that there are less habitat and less bears. And
Are you allowed to shoot the cougars?
I'm just thinking you're
I took a picture of it. Okay, good. Is that what you're talking about? I took a picture. It's 9 feet long. It was 9 feet on the picture. I could, you know, I could tell. Anything else?
I guess, so how, I know it's a big question that I'm always asking again, but how has your experience as a doctor of Oriental medicine informed the work that you do now?
Absolutely, so much, so much. And it's the point of view of seeing, you know, in Oriental medicine, I am Yisha, which is to nourish abundance, to nourish health, well-being. And so that's the framework that I'm always putting, like, what can I do? This area of the land is very barren. So I think what I'll do is I'll do my bale feeding on the snow in that area, because then we'll have more fines, more food, everything is nourishment is there. And so I'm always thinking about what can I do to add a better environment for the good life to move into. And you know, I can get very woo-woo about things too. You know, like I tell people, well, you've got to do things on this time because it's the full moon or this is it. And I don't you know, I live in the place where I live, and I teach the Forage children and the people that live in my area. And not everyone wants to hear it that way, but I can frame it in a different way, because there are so many ways to explain things. So I can think of it in terms of ha, you know, some sheep, for shot, you know. Or I can say, well, your child doesn't have the ability to nourish the baby, you know, blah, 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 blah. So it's just how you explain it. But I'm always thinking in that way. I don't think I can not think that way. Other? Yes?
Is there a book that you might recommend on the traditional Chinese medicine, if somebody wanted to get into that?
Oh, yeah, about 100.
Maybe one just to start with?
Ted Kapchuk, K-A-P-T-C-H-U-K. Ted Kapchuk has a book called The Web That Has No Weaver. And that is a really thorough introduction, but at a level where it makes it more intelligible to you if you don't have all that background of words.
Thank you.
The Web That Has No Weaver. When it came out, it was really nice. One of the observations that I have made inside myself, I look at regenerative agriculture now, and it is like where Oriental medicine was in the United States in 1972, 3, 5. I got started in 1975. I'd already been a nurse and, you know, etc. So anyway, in those times, people would say, acupuncture, is that something with fish? You know? I mean, they were like, oh, do you think that would work? Would anybody let you do that? You know, I mean, it was, you wouldn't believe the stuff that I have gone through in terms of being a doctor of Oriental medicine. And now everybody knows about it. It's like, oh yeah, my acupuncture skit does this for my stress, for my ear. You know? And it's very commonplace. And regenerative agriculture is almost in that same situation, because when I first started teaching the 4-H kids and coaching people along about this, I would say, you know, it's all about restorative, it's all about sustainable, it's all, you know, like we're trying to find language to suit the idea that you don't want to just deplete. You want to build, you want to nourish, you want to provide an environment where the life can flourish. And so now I started talking about regenerative agriculture, and lo and behold, I was in the Master Forest Stewardship program. I'm one of the teachers for a course that I started there called 10 Acres and a Dream, because so many people came to the North Idaho, they all want to get 10 acres and, you know, become something. So anyway, I said to the university, we need to have a course. Well, I'm at the course there, and I'm explaining to them, I said, you know, it's not really, the words shouldn't be really sustainable agriculture. They should be restorative agriculture, because it's a whole nother level. And they looked at me and they said, you know, there's a movement about that. And I said, no kidding, really? Okay. So anyway, and then that's how I got started learning more and more and more. But yeah, you know, it's a kind of exciting place to be, because you know that in 20 years from now or 25 years from now, we either won't be on the planet, there won't be a planet, or else we will be doing really, really well, nourishing the environment, using plants to do what plants do. And I mean, how great is that?
Don't forget the mushrooms.
Of course, yes, yes. Well, I kind of, you know, simplistically, I put that in, I put plants to include them, which is not correct, but yes, yes. Okay, thank you very much.